For my husband's family's sake, I pretended to be the small-time consultant they mocked. You don't understand this level. 5 minutes later, my father-in-law's phone vibrated non-stop. That was the $40 million he never knew was mine, leaving his $53 million empire. When he screamed into the phone, the whole table turned to me. I calmly put my fork down. I'm just doing what everyone told me. Stay out of grown-up business. My name is Sophia Reed, and I am sitting through another Sunday dinner at the Hayes family mausoleum. They call it a home. This sprawling structure of glass and cold stone perched on a hill outside Chicago, but it has always felt like a place where things go to die. Joy, individuality, my own voice. Tonight, the long mahogany table gleams under a cold chandelier, reflecting the heavy silverware and the deep red of a wine that costs more than my mother's monthly mortgage payment. It is, as my mother-in-law Victoria always trills, an intimate family dinner. This intimacy involves me, my husband Noah, his parents Victor and Victoria, his brother Brent, and his sister Mia. 6 people at a table that could seat 24. The empty chairs like missing teeth in a perfect smile. Victor, my father-in-law, and the CEO of Hazewood Properties, is holding his wine glass aloft, his face flushed with triumph and expensive Cabernet. He thrives on these moments, the captive audience of his own bloodline. I am proud to announce, he booms, the sound bouncing off the floor-to-ceiling windows, that as of 5 p.m. Friday, the Lakeside Gateway deal is closed. Hazewood Properties is now officially touching $53 million in total assets. A polite, practiced ripple of applause moves around the table. Victoria beams, her diamonds flashing. Brent raises his glass in a lazy salute, a smirk playing on his lips. Mia is already texting the news, no doubt. Only Noah, my husband, remains focused on his plate. I feel the small stack of papers in my lap, the ones I'd folded neatly from the quarterly report Noah had so carelessly left on our kitchen counter. The report he dismissed as just work stuff when I picked it up. Victor, I say, and the simple act of speaking cuts through the fog of adulation. 6 heads turn. Silence. The Hayes are not accustomed to me initiating a topic more complex than the weather or the food. Sophia, Victor says, his tone shifting from magnate to disappointed headmaster. Congratulations on the deal, I say, keeping my voice level, respectful. I just happened to notice in the last quarterly report there were a few figures that caught my eye. I was wondering if you'd be open to discussing the balance sheet on the new acquisitions. Victor's smile tightens. The balance sheet? Yes. I was just concerned about the leverage ratios you're carrying. The cash flow from the existing properties seems strained, and it looks like you have several significant short-term bridge loans, all coming due in the 3rd quarter. I pause, looking directly at him. It seems aggressive, risky. If one lender pulls back, it could trigger a cascade. The silence that follows is different, heavier, colder. Then Victor throws his head back and laughs. It is not a kind laugh. It is a booming, dismissive, echoing laugh that fills the entire room. Sophia, he chokes out, wiping a tear of mirth from his eye. We have an entire team of Ivy League MBAs. We have Goldman. We have JP Morgan. We do not need, with all due respect, the small-time input of a provincial consultant. His words hit, and the rest of the pack joins in. Victoria lets out a tinkling high society laugh, a sound of pure weaponized pity. Oh dear, she's so earnest. Mia, who hasn't worked a day in her life, looks me up and down. her gaze lingering on the simple sheath dress I wore. Her lip curls. Is that what they teach you wherever you go to school? Brent just smirks, that same arrogant, empty expression, and takes a large gulp of wine. I look at Noah, my husband, the man who held my hand in a small diner on our third date, and told me he loved that I was real. He is looking down, his jaw is tight. He picks up his steak knife and begins to cut his filet mignon with intense, meticulous precision, sawing back and forth, back and forth. He does not look up. He does not say a word. He has not said a word in my defense at this table in over 2 years. The heat is a physical thing, a prickle on my neck, the sting of an invisible slap. I feel the familiar shrinking, the desperate urge to apologize, to make myself smaller, to disappear. But something is different tonight. Tonight, the familiar sting doesn't feel like shame. It feels like fuel. I slowly, deliberately fold my small printout of his disastrous financial report and place it beside my plate. I pick up my own glass of wine and take a slow, measured sip. The wine is excellent. I let it sit on my tongue, tasting the notes of cherry and impending doom. I place the glass down with a soft click. You're right, Victor. My apologies, I say, my voice perfectly placid. I turn to my mother-in-law. Victoria, the meal is exquisite as always. I smile, a small, tight smile that doesn't reach my eyes. Then I reach for the clutch purse in my lap. If you'll excuse me, I say, standing up, my napkin placed neatly on my chair. I just need to make a quick call to a client. It won't take a moment. No one protests. They are already moving on. Victor already launching into another story of his own genius. I am dismissed, forgotten. I walk out of the dining room, my heels clicking softly on the imported Italian marble. I don't go to the powder room. I don't go to the guest wing. I walk straight down the hall to Victor's study, his sanctuary. The door is heavy, solid oak. I push it open, step inside, and turn the heavy brass lock. The room is a monument to him. Dark wood, leather-bound books he's never read, and an entire wall of ego photos, as I call them. Victor shaking hands with senators. Victor with the governor. Victor cutting a ribbon with giant scissors. Victor, Victor, Victor. I ignore them. I sit in his massive leather chair, the one that smells like his cigars and self-satisfaction. I pull my phone from my purse. It's not a client. I open an encrypted messaging app. The contact is simple. Logan Hale. My fingers are perfectly steady. I feel a profound, glacial calm settle over me. The humiliation from the table, the years of small cuts, the profound ache of Noah's silence, it all condenses into 3 simple words. I type, execute order. I hit send. The 3 dots appear immediately. Logan is always on. He knows the protocols. A new message pops up less than 15 seconds later. Logan, Sophia, confirming this is a code red. This is the $40 million across all 7 credit facilities and loan notes. You understand this is the nuclear option, triggering the cross-default covenants with the other banks. We'll call in north of $60 million in immediate obligations. They won't have the liquidity. This will be an extinction-level event for Hazewood. I look at the wall of photos. Victor smiling, powerful, untouchable. I think of Noah's knife sawing his steak. I think of Mia's laugh. I type back, Sophia, I understand. Execute immediately. And Logan standing by. Sophia, have the first official notification of default and capital recall sent directly to Victor's personal email, his work phone, and his smartwatch. I want him to read it at dinner. Logan, understood. Godspeed, Sophia. The message disappears. I close the app, I delete the thread, I sit in Victor's chair for 1 full minute, breathing in the smell of old leather. I can hear the faint, muffled sound of laughter from the dining room down the hall. Then I stand up, smooth my dress, and unlock the door. Time to return to the party. As I walk back to the dining room, my steps are silent, measured. They see the simple dress and the quiet demeanor. They see the girl from a small town. They are not wrong, but they have no idea which town it was or what that town forged. They do not know about Steelville, Michigan. Steelville is not a place you visit. It is a place you survive. It is the skeletal remains of a steel town clinging to a river that has long since turned brown. My childhood memories are not of vacations or horse riding lessons. They are a sensory map of decay, the metallic tang of factory smoke in the air, even on a Sunday. The gray-yellow peel of paint on every house on our street. The constant grinding rumble of old trucks gearing down on the highway, their engines coughing out diesel fumes. My father was a ghost in that landscape, a strong man broken not by a lack of will, but by a half-ton of fallen rebar at the mill. His spine was a roadmap of shattered potential. He lived on a small disability check that was both a lifeline and an insult. He spent his days in a worn armchair, watching the world through a window, the silence in him deeper than any of us could reach. My mother fought the tide with every breath. She was a ghost of a different kind, one who never sat still. She was a cashier at the 24-hour supermarket, her nights spent under fluorescent lights, her hands chapped from the cold. When that shift ended, she would drive our rattling, rust-eaten Ford to a small office building downtown and clean the toilets and empty the trash cans of men who made more in an hour than she made in a week. I was an accountant. At 13, I was the one who sat at the kitchen table with a pile of mail. I was the one who managed the numbers. My parents were too proud or too tired or too broken. So I learned the language of survival. I learned the precise, nauseating dance of robbing Peter to pay Paul. I learned which voice to use when calling the electric company to ask for a 7-day extension. I learned how to read the fine print on a late notice, to understand the difference between a warning and a final disconnect. I didn't just see bills, I started to see a map. I saw the flow of money as a living system. I saw the 20-cent difference in milk prices between two stores as a victory. I saw the predatory loop of a payday loan advertisement. I saw the way my mother's stacked coupons were a form of financial defense. It wasn't math, it was a war, and I was the quartermaster. They see me as provincial. They have no idea. I would have stayed in Steelville. I would have become my mother. Or worse, I would have become my father. But a high school guidance counselor, a tired woman with kind eyes named Mrs. Ramirez, saw something else. She saw my meticulous tracking of our home finances, spreadsheets I built on a donated library computer, and called me into her office. "Sophia," she said, pushing a stack of financial aid forms across her desk, "you don't belong here." I just stared at her. "College is not for people like me, Mrs. Ramirez." "College," she said, tapping the forms, "is for people who are smart enough to get out. You see patterns in numbers that other people can't. Go use it." She forced me to apply. And when a full-ride scholarship for finance came through from a public university in Illinois, I packed my life into a single duffel bag and a cardboard box. I left Steelville, but it never left me. College was another kind of hustle. While the other students were finding themselves, I was just trying to stay afloat. I worked 3 jobs. I was a waitress at a 24-hour diner, memorizing the complex social math of who tipped and why. I was a teaching assistant for an economics professor, grading the papers of kids who would one day be just like Brent Hayes. And every Saturday, I did the books for a local auto repair shop, a chaotic ledger of cash, credit, and parts that I wrestled into perfect, balanced order. When I graduated, I did not apply to Goldman. I did not send my resume to J.P. Morgan. I took a small, cheap, windowless office in a tired building in Chicago and opened Peak Ridge Consulting. My clients were not billionaires. They were the people I knew. The Wea nail salon run by a Vietnamese family who was brilliant at their craft but baffled by the tax code. The auto shop that hired me full-time. The small chain of taco stands trying to figure out how to finance a second location without losing their shirts. I was the girl from Steelville, and I spoke their language. I helped them survive. Then one rainy Tuesday, the bell on my office door tinkled, and Abigail Thorne walked in. She was 78 years old, with sharp blue eyes, silver hair pulled into a severe bun, and a wool vest that looked like it had been expensive 30 years ago and was still perfectly serviceable. She did not smell of perfume, but of old books and money that had been money for a very long time. She stood in my tiny, cluttered office, looked at the awards I'd won for local community business, and said, "They say you're the one who can find the cracks. I have a very old, very large house, and I believe it's full of them." She asked me to review her entire estate, her trusts, her holdings. I thought she was a wealthy widow looking for a simple audit. I was wrong. Abigail Thorne was not a wealthy widow. She was an architect. She didn't just hire me, she trained me for 4 years. She became my real-world doctorate. She sat with me in my small office, drinking my terrible drip coffee, and taught me a level of finance that doesn't exist in textbooks. She taught me about complex holding structures, about shell corporations in jurisdictions I'd never heard of, about the art of making $50 million look like 50 cents. "Never be the loudest person in the room, Sophia," she'd say, her pen hovering over a complex diagram of shell companies. "Never let them see your name. But most importantly, let them underestimate you. Let them think you are simple or poor or unimportant. It is the single greatest strategic advantage you will ever have. Let them open the door for you, and then you buy the building." When she was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, she was as pragmatic as ever. She refused treatment, saying she had no interest in being a burden. A week before she died, she had her lawyers bring me a single handwritten note. They also brought the final paperwork. Abigail Thorne left me everything, not in a simple, vulgar lump sum. She left me the entire network, the holding companies, the trusts, the offshore accounts, a labyrinth of assets so complex, so layered, so anonymous, that my name appeared nowhere on the surface. I was just the final, ultimate beneficiary, the hand in the shadow. The total value was just shy of $60 million. I was 28 years old. I was the secret owner of Northbridge Capital Trust, one of the most discreet and powerful private lenders in the region. And I told no one. I kept my small office. I kept my small clients. I kept my old Subaru because I knew with the cold certainty of Steelville that money is not just for comfort. Money is for power. Money is for armor. And sometimes money is for war. I met Noah Hayes 6 months after Abigail Thorne died. I was still learning the weight of the 60 million, still living in my small rental apartment, still driving my old Subaru, and still running Peak Ridge Consulting. My life on the surface had not changed. I was at a fundraiser for the community hospital. I was not a donor. I was a volunteer sitting at a small table in the lobby with a stack of pamphlets offering pro bono financial counseling for families navigating catastrophic medical debt. It was the world I understood. He was the world I did not. He was the Hayes in the Hayeswood Properties surgical wing. He was the son of the major sponsor, dispatched to the event, obligated to show his face and look handsomely bored. I saw him leaning against a pillar, actively avoiding the hospital board members, looking at the cheap champagne in his hand as if it had personally offended him. He didn't look like a princeling. He looked like a man in a very expensive cage. I walked past him to get a bottle of water. It's painful, I know. He looked up, startled. What? The mortality rates? The small talk, I said, nodding toward the cluster of doctors and developers. You look like you're about to make a break for the exit. A real smile, not a practiced one, broke across his face. Is it that obvious? My father insists these events are vital for the community. I think they're proof that purgatory is just a ballroom with bad lighting and lukewarm appetizers. He was funny. He was self-deprecating. He did not, in that first 5 minutes, ask me what I did, who I knew, or where I summered. He just seemed relieved to be talking to a normal person. Sophia Reed, I said, offering my hand. Peak Ridge Consulting. Noah Hayes, he said. He glanced at my name tag, which simply read, Sophia, Volunteer, Peak Ridge. Are you a mountain climber? Sort of, I said. I mostly just help small businesses not fall off them. I'm a consultant, local shops, restaurants, that sort of thing. That's real, he said. And the intensity in his gaze caught me off guard. You actually build things. I just move money around for my father. This was the moment, the first critical juncture. Abigail's voice was sharp in my memory. Let them think you are unimportant. It is the greatest strategic advantage you will ever have. So I let him see Sophia Reed, the small business consultant from the rented office. I let him see the girl who volunteers on a Tuesday night. I did not mention Abigail. I did not mention Northbridge. I did not mention the $60 million sitting in a labyrinth of trusts waiting for my command. He asked for my number. I wrote it on the back of a medical billing pamphlet. Our first dates were a deliberate departure from his world. He insisted, no stuffy, expensive restaurants. He took me hiking. He took me to a dark, wonderful blues bar in a basement. We ate tacos from a food truck at 2 in the morning, sitting on the curb. He laughed, really laughed, when I got salsa on my shirt. He was fascinated by my past. He asked about Steelville, and unlike the few people I'd ever told, he didn't recoil in pity. He leaned in, mesmerized. Wait, back up, he said one night over cheap beers at a neighborhood pub. Your mother really tracked the grocery flyer discounts against the coupon expiration dates? It was the only way we ate meat that week, I said, waiting for the inevitable shift, the discomfort. But it never came. He just shook his head, a look of genuine awe on his face. That's incredible, Sophia. My God, my family argues over which caterer to use. You were managing a household budget at 13. You are without a doubt the most capable person I have ever met. He called me his self-made woman. He seemed to admire my grit. He loved that I had clawed my way up, that I was real. It became a test, a secret test, One I was running on him and on myself. I kept my armor hidden. I told no one about the inheritance. I kept my apartment. I kept my old Subaru. I wanted more than anything to know that he loved me, that he loved Sophia Reed from Steelville, the girl who knew how to make a dollar scream, not the woman who could buy and sell his father's entire portfolio before breakfast. For 10 months he passed the test, or so I believed. 10 months after the fundraiser, he drove us up into the mountains. We hiked for hours until we reached a rocky outcrop that overlooked the entire glittering expanse of Chicago. The sun was setting, painting the sky in violent shades of orange and purple. He was quiet, almost nervous. Then he stopped and took both my hands. "Sophia," he said, his voice a little shaky. "I have been around so many fake people my entire life. My family are good people, but they only see the world in terms of assets and deals. They don't know what's real." He dropped to one knee on the rocky path. He pulled out a box. It wasn't velvet. It was simple polished wood. "You," he said, his eyes locked on mine, "are the realest person I have ever known. You make me feel real. You ground me. I don't want to be Noah Hayes, the son of the company. I just want to be Noah Hayes, your husband. Will you marry me?" I said yes. I said yes because I was in love, and because I believed he was the one man in the world who would never ever judge me for where I came from. I believed he was my partner, my equal, my escape from the cold, transactional world of the Hayeses and the cold, transactional world of Abigail Thorne. We had a small wedding on a beach in Florida. That was my request. Small. Small to the Hayeses meant only 50 guests. My side consisted of my mother. She flew in from Michigan, her first time ever on an airplane. She wore a pale blue dress she had bought from the local department store, the most expensive thing she'd ever owned. And she cried from the moment she saw the ocean. Noah's side was not from Michigan. It was a sea of navy blazers, expensive silks, and quiet, confident jewelry. It was partners from Hazewood, families he'd known since boarding school, and several of his father's bankers. At the reception, as the sun set over the Gulf, I was standing near a floral arch that cost more than my car. I overheard 2 of Noah's friends holding glasses of champagne. "Well, she's cute," one of them said, a man I'd been introduced to as Brent. "Quiet," the other replied. "She seems sweet. At least she knows her place." The first one laughed. "Totally. A sweet, simple, small-town girl. It's a nice starter marriage. Noah can always upgrade later when he gets serious about taking over from Victor." My blood went cold. I felt the heat rise in my cheeks. I told myself it was just drunk, bitter friends. I told myself they didn't know us. I turned and walked away, found Noah by the water, and he kissed me. I forced myself to forget their words. I could not, however, forget Noah's. Later that night, in the stunning oceanfront suite, the sound of the waves crashing outside. We were married. We were happy. Noah, in a plush hotel robe, poured 2 glasses of champagne. "Babe," he said, handing me a glass, "I have some great news." "More great news than this?" I smiled. "I talked to my dad. He beamed, so proud. He's very impressed with you, you know, your story, your grit. He said, when we get back to Chicago, he'd be happy to bring you into Hazewood. You know, let you learn the ropes from the ground up. He said you'll learn a lot. He was so happy to offer me this gift. Bring you in, let you learn. I was not a partner. I was a project. I was a stray puppy. He was bringing in from the cold, and his father Victor was going to graciously let me learn how to be one of them. The way he said it, the casual, unthinking ownership in his voice, made me feel a chill I hadn't felt since I was 13, begging the man at the power company for 7 more days. It was the chill of the one who has all the power talking to the one who has none. I smiled. It was a bright, brittle smile. "That sounds interesting, honey. We can definitely talk about it when we get back." But in that moment, in that beautiful room on my wedding night, the test changed. My secret test was no longer about whether Noah would love me without money. The new test was whether his family would. I made a decision. Northbridge Capital Trust, Abigail's $60 million legacy, my armor, my real life, it would all stay hidden. It would remain my secret. I would walk into the Hayes family home as Sophia Reed from Steelville, Michigan. I would bring nothing but my grit and my small-time advisory firm. I would let them see me as small. I would let them underestimate me. I wanted to see with my own eyes if they could ever accept me for who I was, or if, in the end, they were exactly the monsters I was learning to hunt. The ritual began every Sunday at precisely 6 p.m. We would get into Noah's BMW, not my Subaru, which was deemed unsuitable for the driveway of the main house. We would drive 20 minutes from our sleek, modern, but soulless apartment, a starter property owned by Hayeswood, of course, to the fortress on the hill. The Hayes residence was 9,000 square feet of glass, cold-rolled steel, and imported stone. It had an infinity pool that bled into the horizon and walls covered in abstract art that was chosen for its investment value, not its beauty. Victor called it a testament to self-made grit. He conveniently forgot the $50 million seed loan from his own father that started it all. My mother-in-law, Victoria, would greet us at the door, her smile as bright and fragile as the diamonds on her fingers. She would kiss Noah, then turn to me, her eyes doing a rapid, head-to-toe scan. "Sophia, darling," she'd coo, touching the sleeve of my perfectly nice but not designer dress. "That's a lovely little find. It must be so convenient not to have to worry about dry cleaning all the time." And so it began, the first small cut of the evening. We would move to the terrace for cocktails, which were really just a pre-dinner opportunity for Victor to hold court. He was the sun, and we were the cold, dead planets orbiting him. He would pace in front of the outdoor fireplace, swirling a tumbler of 18-year-old scotch, recounting his week. "So I told the board at First Union," he'd declare, "if you're not willing to play ball, Hayeswood will find a bank that is." 2 hours later, their CEO is on my personal line, apologizing. You have to know how to apply smart leverage. You crush them, but you do it intelligently. I'd watch him, listening to him, brag about the very financial instruments I knew from my own secret vantage point were dangerously overextended. He wasn't applying smart leverage. He was a gambler who had been on a winning streak, mistaking luck for genius. Once, in the early months, I'd tried to engage. "That's interesting, Victor," I'd said, my voice cutting into the silence. "Have you considered diversifying your debt? Relying on a single banking partner, especially for short-term liquidity, can create a systemic risk if the market shifts." The entire family froze. Victor's eyes narrowed. Victoria looked like I had just used a fish fork for the salad. A long, agonizing second passed. Then Victor laughed, a short barking sound. "That's good, Sophia. Very business 101. I'll let my MBA team know." And just like that, Victoria turned to Mia. "Speaking of risks, darling, did you get those ski boots you wanted for Jackson Hole?" The subject was changed. The conversation moved on. I had not been heard. I had simply malfunctioned. I had made a noise I was not supposed to make. I looked at Noah. He gave me a tiny, pained smile and a quick squeeze of my hand under the table. A gesture that said, "Just let it go, please." At first, his hand on my leg was a comfort. It was his silent alliance, his way of saying, "I'm with you even if they're not." But as the Sundays wore on, the hand-holding became less frequent. The squeeze became a brief tap. Then the tap was withdrawn halfway, as if he suddenly remembered his father was watching. Finally, his hands just stayed on his own lap, clenched tightly as he let the tide of his family wash over me. Mia was the sniper. While Victor used a sledgehammer, Mia used a scalpel, and she aimed for the soft places she knew I came from. "Sophia," she'd say, her tone dripping with feigned curiosity. "A client of ours just got back from the Amalfi Coast. You've been to Europe, right?" She would pause, letting the O hang in the air, when I simply shook my head. "Well, you must. You would just adore it. It's so civilized." She would glance at the simple leather satchel I carried, the one that held my laptop and the ledgers for my small clients. "I keep meaning to ask where you get your bags. They're so functional." Brent, the older brother, was the court jester, using jokes to deliver the same poison. He'd clap Noah on the back, always after a few too many scotches. "Heard you're letting Sophia here consult on the new apartment build-out." He'd chuckle. "Just on some interior finishes, Brent," Noah would say, his face tight. Brent's eyes would find me. "That's great. Hey, Sophia, how's that little company of yours, Peak Ridge?" "Right. What's the revenue on that these days? Is it enough to cover the wine bill at this table?" The table would erupt in laughter. Victor, Victoria, Mia, and after a beat, a faint, forced, heartbreaking chuckle from my husband. Noah's laughter was the worst cut of all. I would just smile, the smile I learned in Steelville, the one you give the man at the power company when he says, "You have 24 hours." The smile that says, "I am not a threat." The smile that says, "I am nothing. You have all the power." I would swallow the insult, the rage, the humiliation, and wash it down with their expensive, bitter wine. The drive home was always silent. I would sit in the passenger seat of the BMW, watching the lights of Chicago pass by, the knot in my stomach so tight I could barely breathe. Back in our apartment, I would finally let the mask crack. "Why don't you ever say anything?" I'd ask, my voice quiet, trying not to sound like the sensitive woman he accused me of being. "Say anything about what, babe?" Noah would ask, already unbuttoning his shirt, already halfway out of the conversation. "About Brent, about your mother, about the way they talk to me." Enough to cover the wine bill, not worrying about dry cleaning. Noah would sigh, a heavy put-upon sound. He'd rub his face, the picture of a man burdened. "Sophia, come on. They're just kidding. That's just how they are. You're being too sensitive." Sensitive. I'd feel the heat rising. "It's not sensitive to be insulted, Noah. They are actively, deliberately making me feel small. And you let them." "No," he'd snap, his patience gone. "I'm not letting them. I'm trying to keep the peace. You don't understand, Sophia. They're on another level. The stakes are different. The world they live in, it's just different. You have to understand that." Another level. That was the phrase, the one that separated them from me. I was on a lower level, the provincial consultant, the girl from the steel town. I was not meant to understand their high-altitude games. I was just meant to be grateful I was allowed in the room at all. So I stopped. I stopped trying. I stopped offering opinions. I stopped bringing up my work, my clients, my thoughts. I began the process of making myself invisible, a process they had started, and I was now in an act of profound self-betrayal, finishing. My transformation was slow but total. I became a ghost at their table. I smiled when smiled at. I passed the salt. I answered direct questions with short, simple, non-threatening answers. "How is your work, dear?" Victoria would ask, not because she cared, but because it was her turn. "It's fine, thank you. Keeping busy." "And your mother?" "She's well, thank you." I became a perfect, polished, empty mirror. I reflected their own grandeur back at them, and they loved me for it. They finally had the daughter-in-law they wanted, a quiet, pretty, grateful accessory who knew her place. They saw it as a victory, a successful assimilation. I saw it as a training ground. I was no longer a wife at that table. I was an anthropologist. I was an undercover agent. I sat in silence and I watched. I learned their weaknesses. I saw the cracks in Victor's bravado. I saw the desperation in Noah's compliance. I saw the deep, hollow insecurity beneath Mia's cruelty. I was a girl from Steelville. I knew how to read the fine print. I knew how to find the cracks. And as I sat there invisible, surrounded by the 9,000 square foot monument to their ego, I began to plan. I was no longer trying to get in. I was figuring out the quietest, most efficient way to tear the whole damn thing down. It happened on a Tuesday, a day so mundane I almost missed it. Noah had rushed out of the apartment, late for a golf game with a developer, and had left his briefcase on the dining table. He also left a thick, binder-clipped document beside it. Internal Projections Creditor Summary Q2. Normally, I would have ignored it. I had been practicing invisibility after all, and that included his work. But I was cleaning the table, and as I picked it up to move it, the binder slipped open. It fell open to a page titled Key Credit Facilities Primary Lenders. I saw a list of the usual suspects: J.P. Morgan, First Union Bank, a few private equity lenders, and then I saw a logo, a simple, discrete graphic, a stylized N over a B, Northbridge Capital Trust. I dropped the binder. The pages fanned out across the floor. My blood turned to ice, then to fire. I could not breathe. It was impossible. Northbridge was my company. It was Abigail's fortress, built on the principle of absolute anonymity. We, Logan and I, invested in distressed municipal bonds, in tech startups, in European real estate. We did not lend to flashy, high-risk, family-run, commercial developers like Hazewood. I ran to my home office, the small room Noah called my hobby space, and locked the door. I opened my encrypted laptop and sent a single one-line message to Logan. "Pull the complete file and all originating documents for client Hazewood Properties LLC, now." The response was, as always, immediate. Pulling. For 10 minutes I stared at the wall. I was not Sophia Reed, the invisible wife. I was the girl from Steelville, and I had just found a hole in my ledger. My screen chimed. A massive encrypted file arrived. Logan's note was short. "Sophia, you need to see this. The file originated 4.5 years ago. Before you. It was one of Abigail's last deals." I opened the first document. It was a master loan agreement, signed by Abigail Thorne herself. She had, for reasons I couldn't fathom, seen Victor Hayes' company as a solid old money investment. She had been his first, most significant private lender, the one who gave him the capital to start his most aggressive expansion. And when she died, the file and its management had passed to me. It was one of 100 active accounts, a name I had seen on reports, Hayeswood. But I had never, not once, connected it to Noah's family. My brain had kept them in two separate boxes. The Hayeses were family. Hayeswood was just a file. I read on, my blood running colder with every page. The deals were sound at first, but in the last 2 years, since Noah and I had been married, since Victor had accelerated his smart leverage, the draws on the credit line had become frantic. He was using Northbridge's stable, low-interest capital to finance his increasingly reckless gambles. I opened the next file, the one Logan had flagged in red. Covenant agreements, cross-default provisions. This was it. This was the map I had learned to read at my kitchen table in Michigan. Abigail, in her genius, had not just lent him money. She had tied her loans to every other loan he had. The agreements with First Union, with J.P. Morgan, with the private equity sharks, they all contained a specific, brutal clause, a cross-default clause. It meant that if Victor defaulted on his loan to any single one of his lenders, he was considered in default to all of them. And Northbridge Capital Trust, my $40 million, was not just a lender, it was the linchpin. We held the primary note. Our contract, the one Abigail had written, gave us the right to call our entire $40 million loan, due in full for any reason, with 24 hours notice. If I made that call, the cross default would trigger. All the other banks, the ones Victor bragged about crushing, would be legally obligated to call their loans too. I did the math, my $40 million plus their $65 million due in 24 hours. I looked at the number, $65 million. I knew from the quarterly report I'd seen tonight that Hayeswood Properties did not have $65 million. They didn't have 10. They were leveraged to the hilt, a house of cards built on swagger and my secret inheritance. The girl from the steel town, the provincial consultant he had laughed at, was not a guest in his house. I was the foundation. I was the pillar holding up the entire rotting $53 million empire, and I had just found the lever that would bring it all down. The rage was so profound, so complete, it was almost silent, but he was still my husband. This was his family, his name. A part of me, the part that had fallen in love with him in a blues bar, was screaming. I had to try one last time. I had to know for my own soul that I had given him every possible chance to be the man I thought I'd married. I would not be invisible. I would give him the data. I would give him the chance to be my partner. I spent an hour that night. I did not use the Northbridge letterhead. I printed out a simple 2-page analysis on my own Peak Ridge consulting paper. I kept it simple. I used the old theories he and his father so despised. Basic cash flow analysis, debt-to-equity ratios. I circled the 3 most dangerous bridge loans. I highlighted the negative cash flow. At the bottom, I did not write, "You are about to go bankrupt." I wrote by hand in discreet, clear lettering. This level of exposure is unsustainable. The reliance on a single credit facility, Note B, is a critical vulnerability. Suggest immediate deleveraging and diversification of lenders, even at a higher interest rate, to avoid covenant breach. I was in effect giving him a map to save himself from me. I slid the 2 pages onto the keyboard of his laptop on his desk. I did not say a word about it. I just left it for him, an offering, a final test. I waited. A day passed. He did not mention it. 2 days. He was busy, cheerful, distant. The weekend came. That Sunday, we drove to the house. The dinner was, as I've already told you, a masterpiece of humiliation. It was the night Victor announced the Lakeside Gateway deal, the deal I now knew had been financed by the last $5 million of my money. And it was the night I offered my opinion. But what I haven't told you is what happened before Victor cut me off. When Noah heard me start to talk about leverage ratios and short-term debt, a look of recognition flashed in his eyes. He knew what I was talking about. He had read my memo. For one singular agonizing moment, I thought he would speak. I thought he would say, "Wait, Dad, she's right. I was looking at her analysis, and she has a point." Instead, he sat there. He let his father laugh. He let his sister mock me. He watched me be reduced to nothing. And then, as the laughter died down, Noah, my husband, cleared his throat. He picked up his wineglass and smiled, a conspiratorial boys' club smile at his father. "You have to be careful, Dad," Noah said, and my heart stopped. There are a lot of people out there with old theories. Someone I know, was looking at some of our old numbers, and they got so spun up talking about critical vulnerability. They just don't understand the level we're operating on. He had not just ignored my warning. He had not just let me be humiliated. He had taken my final desperate offer of help, my lifeline, and he had handed it to his father as a joke. He had offered up my intelligence as a sacrifice at the family altar, just to prove how loyal he was. Victor beamed. "That's my son. He gets it." I felt the last thin thread of my love for him snap. It didn't break with a roar. It was a quiet, cold, precise snip. This was no longer a marriage. This was a hostile takeover. And I was the one being acquired. The conflict inside me vanished. The girl from Steelville, the accountant, the strategist that Abigail Thorne had trained, took over. There was no more emotion. There was only a balance sheet. I began to plan. I spent the next 2 months preparing. I was no longer an invisible wife. I was a liquidator. I had Logan quietly, meticulously review every single legal clause. I had him trace the funds, ensuring that when I pulled them, my own assets were firewalled from the blast radius. I had my legal team draft contingency plans to create a trust for the low-level employees of Hazewood. The secretaries, the site managers, the janitors, the people who, like my parents, would be the first collateral damage. I would fund it myself, anonymously, to cover their last 2 paychecks. I prepared for this night, the dinner, the laughter, the "you don't understand this" level. It was not an insult that triggered me. It was a signal. It was the starting gun I had been waiting for, the final confirmation that my analysis was correct. They were, all of them, a bad investment. The scene in Victor's study was not an act of impulse. It was the final cold, logical execution of a plan that had been in motion for weeks. It was the inevitable mathematical result of their own actions. It was simply the collection of a debt. I returned to my seat at the long polished table. The heavy, ornate chair slid smoothly, silently back into its place. My slice of seared salmon, which had been artfully arranged over a bed of couscous, had gone cold. I picked up my fork and knife. The heavy silver felt solid, real in my hands. I took a small bite of the fish. It was cold, tasteless, but I chewed, swallowed, and took a sip of water. I was invisible after all, a ghost at the feast. Across the table, the Hazies had not missed me. Victor was in the middle of a grand, self-congratulatory monologue about the Lakeside Gateway deal. And the beauty of it, he was saying, is that we used their own leverage against them. They wanted a bidding war. but I went straight to their primary lender, an old school fund, and locked in the financing before they even knew we were at the table. A classic Hayeswood victory. He raised his glass, and the family dutifully raised theirs. To Hayeswood, Brent said, his voice already a little thick from the wine. To Dad, slurred Mia, who was scrolling through a ski resort's Instagram feed on her phone under the table. To the family, Victoria murmured, her eyes on her husband, full of practiced adoration. I watched Noah. He raised his glass, his eyes meeting his father's. To win, Dad, you always see the angles. I took another bite of cold salmon. My heart was beating a slow, steady, powerful rhythm, like a deep water engine. 1,000, 2,000. Logan's team was moving. The wires were hot. Victor set his glass down, beaming. He was about to launch into another story, perhaps about his own brilliance in college, when the first notification arrived. It was a soft, insistent buzz, a vibration not from a phone, but from the heavy golden steel smartwatch on Victor's left wrist. He was a man who needed his alerts on his skin. He glanced at it, a flicker of annoyance crossing his face, a dinner interruption. He frowned, tapped the screen to silence it, and then ignored it. Probably just a stock market alert. He cleared his throat, ready to resume. Now, the thing about the Chicago market that most people fail to. This one was louder, more violent. It was his phone, the oversized Pro model, lying face up on the mahogany beside his wine glass. The screen lit up the dark wood, flashing a name, Northbridge Capital Trust official notice. Victor's eyes snapped to the phone. His annoyance deepened. Damn it, these lenders. They have no sense of time, no boundaries. He picked up the phone, his thumb hovering over the decline button, but the title, official notice, gave him pause. That was not the language of a casual check-in. He let out a put-upon sigh. Excuse me, this will just be a second. Probably my CFO crying about something. He pressed accept and lifted the phone to his ear, his posture still radiating confidence. Tom, what is it? I'm in the middle of dinner. He listened. I watched. I cut another perfect surgical piece of my salmon. The change was instantaneous. It was not slow. It was as if someone had pulled a support beam from his very spine. Victor's face, flushed with wine and ego, went a chalky, sickly white. His eyes widened, the broad, confident shoulders slumped. The hand holding the wine glass, which he had not set down, began to tremble. What? His voice was a hoarse whisper. What do you mean? Called the entire line? The table, which had been filled with the quiet scraping of cutlery, went utterly, profoundly silent. The only sound was the ticking of the antique grandfather clock in the hall and Victor's voice cracking. That's not possible, he said, his voice rising, gaining a frantic edge. He stood up, knocking his chair back. That's a $40 million facility, Tom. They can't just check the agreement, check the damn covenants. He was pacing now, his back to the table, his free hand pulling at his expensive silk tie. No, 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 no. He was listening, and whatever he was hearing was not good. The cross defaults? Tom, who the hell are these people? Find me a name. Find me the man I need to call. This has to be a mistake. This is, he went quiet, listening again. His entire body was vibrating with a mixture of rage and terror. All of it, he whispered, his voice small. The first union notes, the JPM line, all of it triggered. Victoria was the first to speak. Her hand, covered in diamonds, was shaking so much she had to set her wineglass down, spilling a few red drops on the white linen. Victor, darling, what is it? You're scaring me. It's the lakeside deal, isn't it? Mia said, her voice high and panicked. I knew it. That broker was a snake. I can't cancel my ski trip, Dad. I already paid for the chalet. Brent was sweating. He was visibly sweating. His eyes were wide, and I could see his lips moving, silently doing the math. His bonus, his stock options, his entire unearned future, all tied to the number on his father's balance sheet. Victor turned around. His face was a mask of utter devastation. He looked like a man who had just seen a ghost. He looked for the first time exactly like my father. Small, broken. Victor, Victoria said again, standing up. He lowered the phone from his ear. He didn't bother to end the call. He just let it drop to his side, his arm hanging limply. Northbridge Capital Trust, he said, his voice hollow, addressing the room. They've called the entire note, all $40 million effective immediately. It triggered the cross defaults. What does that mean? Brent asked, his voice a dry croak. Just get another loan. Cover it. We're Hayeswood. It means, Victor said, his eyes dead, that our other lenders, J.P. Morgan, First Union, all of them, their loans are now also due in full by tomorrow. How much? Victoria whispered. Victor looked at her. $65 million at least. We don't have that. We are illiquid. In a few days, we will be bankrupt. Brent finished, and he put his head in his hands. Who is Northbridge? Victoria shrieked. Who are they? Call them. Pay them. Fix it, Victor. I don't know who they are, he roared, the fear turning back to rage. They're ghosts, a trust. We've paid them on time for 5 years. Why would they do this? Why now? Noah, my husband, who had been frozen this entire time, finally moved. He looked at me, his face a mess of confusion. He leaned in, his voice a low, desperate whisper, still trying to make sense of his world. My God, Sophia, he breathed. It must be some kind of hostile takeover, a vulture fund. Someone is playing dirty, trying to break us. He saw me as a fellow victim, a passenger in the crash. I did not look at him. My gaze was fixed on Victor. He was scanning the table, his eyes wild, looking for an answer, an enemy, a lifeline. And then his eyes landed on me. They stopped. He looked at my plate, my perfectly eaten portion of salmon. He looked at my hands, resting calmly in my lap. He looked at my face, which was not panicked, not crying, not confused. It was, I imagine, a mask of profound glacial calm, the calm of the girl from Steelville, Michigan, who has just finished her math. He saw, in that one instant, the only person in the room who was not surprised. He saw the only person who was not afraid. A new, different kind of dread dawned in his eyes. A sudden, unthinkable suspicion. Sophia, he said, and my name was a rasp. The whole table went silent, turning from him to me. You, he started, his voice shaking. You're the one who was in the financials, the reports. You knew the covenants. You asked about our lenders. He took a step toward the table, his eyes locked on mine. He choked. Do you know something about this? About Northbridge? The grandfather clock in the hall ticked. 1, 2, 3. I lifted my gaze from my plate and met his. I looked into the eyes of the man who had mocked me, dismissed me, and called me provincial. I calmly, deliberately placed my knife and fork on the plate, the tines and blade perfectly aligned. I dabbed my lips with a heavy linen napkin. I don't just know about it, Victor, I said, my voice clear and steady in the ruined silence. I own it. I looked around the table at their horrified, disbelieving faces. Noah, Victoria, Brent, Mia, and I just did the one thing my father-in-law made very clear. We don't need your small-time help. The silence that followed my words was not empty. It was a physical weight, a vacuum that sucked all the air from the room. It was broken by the sound of glass shattering. Mia's hand, which had been frozen in the air, spasmed. Her wineglass tumbled to the floor, splashing Cabernet across the white rug like a fresh arterial spray. She just stared at the spot, her mouth open. Brent let out a single sharp word, a curse. He pushed his chair back, his face a mottled, sweaty red. Victoria, however, found her voice. It was a thin, greedy, disbelieving series of gasps. Do you own it? You are Northbridge? You, Sophia, are Sophia. She's lying. Victor finally exploded, his voice a roar. The color had come rushing back to his face in a tide of pure, unadulterated fury. This is a trick, a corporate shakedown. You've been planning this. You snake. You came into my house. You ate my food. You married my son. All to get inside. You've been setting this trap from the beginning. He lunged toward me, his finger jabbing at my face. I'll have you in jail. I'll have you disbarred. I'll call the lawyers. This is fraud. This is betrayal. I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice. I simply looked at the raving, terrified man in the expensive suit. There is no fraud, Victor, I said, my voice cutting through his tirade. Northbridge Capital Trust made a series of investments in your company. Those investments were secured by contracts that your Ivy League legal team negotiated and approved, contracts that you signed. I leaned forward just an inch. One of those clauses, which I'm sure your team read, gives the lender, that's me, the right to call the loan due in full. I have just exercised that right. It is a simple, legal business decision, and it was a decision I made after you personally, in front of this entire table, confirmed that your company's risk management is based on ego and mockery. Business decision. It was Noah. Hiaz finally spoke. He stood up, but his legs looked unsteady. He was staring at me, but not like he was looking at his wife. He was looking at a complete stranger, a creature he had never seen before. Do you own Northbridge? He said, his mind struggling to connect the two ideas. Northbridge, they're a fund. They're huge. My God, Sophia, you're not a small-time consultant. You're not. His voice trailed off. He was finally doing the math. He was finally, for the first time, seeing the truth. Not the grit he admired, not the girl from Steelville. He was seeing the money, the power, the fact that the woman he'd married, the woman his family had systematically belittled, held their entire $53 million legacy in the palm of her hand and had just very deliberately closed it. You lied to me, he whispered. Our entire marriage. You were playing me. I turned my full attention to him. The anger, the fear, the noise from the rest of the table faded away. It was just him and me, my final audit. I never lied to you, Noah, I said. I just didn't tell you. I kept that part of my life separate. I wanted to see if you could see me, Sophia, the person, not the portfolio. He stared at me, his eyes wide with a desperate, a dawning horror. I have a few questions for you, I said, and my voice was soft, almost conversational. It's a simple test. You've been my husband for 3 years. You're the man who loves me. Are you ready? He just looked at me, confused. What? Question 1, I said, holding up a finger. What is my mother's birthday? Her birthday, he stammered. It's in the spring, right? May? No, April. It's October 17th, I said. Question 2. What was the name of the hospital where my father died? Sophia, I don't. It was Mercy General, I said, my voice still perfectly level. He died in the West Wing, 3rd floor. I told you that story during our first month of dating. Question 3. What is the one food, the one I absolutely hate, that your mother serves me every single time I come here? He was pale. He was shaking his head. I don't know. Mushrooms, I said. She puts them in the sauce. She knows I hate them and I eat them every single Sunday. And you have never, not once, noticed. I let the silence hang for a moment. He could not answer a single simple human question about me. He had never seen me. He had only seen the sweet, simple girl he could bring in and let learn. He had loved the idea of saving me, but he had never bothered to know me. You're right, Noah, I said. You didn't marry me. You married a story you told yourself. I will be filing for divorce in the morning, Noah, I said. And you don't have to worry. I am not asking for a single thing. I'm not entitled to the Hayes family assets. I have my own. You can't, Victor roared. He had found a new, more primal terror, not the loss of his company, but the loss of his leverage. The employees, Sophia, what about them? What about the hundreds of families and the people who work for us? You'd destroy all of them, their jobs, their children, all because of your petty, wounded, small-town pride. It was his last, desperate, pathetic throw, the human shield, the one weapon he had left. I stood up. I finally stood up. I looked down at him, this broken, raging hypocrite. The employees, I said, and for the first time, a note of the ice felt finally entered my voice. The employees I'm destroying. You are the one who has been gambling with their livelihoods. You are the one who took on irresponsible, catastrophic levels of debt. You are the one who leveraged their paychecks against your own ego. You are the one who cut their safety budgets to finance your victories. What did you say? Victoria whispered, her eyes snapping to her husband. Oh, I said, turning to her. You didn't know? You didn't know that he's been funding this entire house of cards with a single massive loan? That he risked everything you have on one single secret source of funding? I smiled a thin, cold Steelville smile. He didn't just lie to me, Victoria. He lied to you, too. He risked your entire life, and he never told you. Victoria let out a sound. It was not a cry. It was a low animal wail of betrayal. She collapsed into her chair, her face in her hands, her diamonds looking dull in the chandelier light. She wasn't crying for the company. She was crying because she had just realized her entire life, her entire marriage, was built on the same hollow foundation. That was it, the final cut. I turned my back on the table. I left the ring. I left the half-eaten plate. I left the weeping, the cursing, the profound, shattering silence of my husband. I walked out of the dining room. I walked down the long, cold marble hallway, past the wall of abstract art Victor had bought, past the photos of him shaking hands with governors, past all the monuments to a man who had, in the space of 10 minutes, ceased to exist. I opened the massive front door. The cold, clear Illinois night air hit my face. It felt clean. I walked across their perfectly manicured stone driveway. I ignored the fleet of BMWs, Porsches, and Range Rovers. I walked to the guest parking to my old, dented, 10-year-old Subaru. I got in. I put the key in the ignition. The engine turned over with a familiar, comforting rumble. I put the car in gear, and I drove away, leaving them behind in the wreckage. I did not look back. I had a lot of work to do. I woke up at 5:30 a.m. in my own bed. This was not the king-sized platform of mahogany and Egyptian cotton in the glass and steel apartment I shared with Noah. This was my bed, a simple queen with a metal frame, in my 2-bedroom rental apartment in a plain, quiet brick building in downtown Chicago. I had kept it for all 3 years of my marriage. Noah knew about it, of course. He called it my silly little office, a waste of money, but a harmless eccentricity. He thought I used it to meet with my small-time clients who were intimidated by our residential high-rise. He never understood what it was. It was not an office, it was an extraction point. It was a clean room, a safe house, a place that held the person I was before I became Mrs. Hayes. It was the one asset he, his family, and their $53 million legacy had never touched. I had slept for 4 hours, a deep, dreamless, adrenaline-spent sleep. I got up, made coffee in a simple drip machine, and sat at my small kitchen table. Then I turned my phone off silent. My hand vibrated for a solid 30 seconds. The screen was a waterfall of notifications, a digital avalanche, 62 missed calls, 141 text messages. They were a storm of panic, rage, and desperation. Victor, Victor, Victor. Voicemail. You think you've won. You've just declared war, you little. I will end you. Victoria text. I am praying for your soul. You have destroyed this family. God will not forgive this. I will never forgive you. Mia text. I hope you die. Brent text. You are a psycho fat snake. I will find you. And then Noah, a stream of messages, a perfect timeline of his own internal collapse. 11:04 p.m. Sophia, this isn't funny. Call me. We need to talk. 11:20 p.m. Pick up the phone. My father is insane. You have to reverse this. 12:05 a.m. You can't just do this. This is my family. You are destroying my family's name. 1:30 a.m. I swear to God, Sophia, I will tell the world what you are. A manipulative, lying gold digger. 3:15 a.m. Sophia, please just call me. We can fix this. I know you're angry. I'm sorry. We can fix this. Please. The rest were from the outside world, the sharks that smelled blood in the water. Tom, the CFO of Hazewood, the company's legal counsel, and new numbers, ones I didn't recognize. The Chicago Tribune, the Wall Street Journal, and pathetically a few local gossip blogs. The war had begun. By 9 a.m., Victor had fired his first public shot. He was, above all, a creature of public relations. He had already hired a crisis PR firm. The first article appeared on a local business wire, citing a source close to the family. The headline, Hazewood Properties, blindsided by hostile internal takeover. Wife of air-manipulated family for years. I read the article over my second cup of coffee. It was a masterpiece of fiction. It painted me as a gold-digging sociopathic spider. A provincial consultant who had wormed her way into the family, feigning love for Noah, all while secretly controlling a shadowy predatory fund. It claimed I was weaponizing a personal dispute to intentionally destroy the legacy of one of Chicago's most charitable families. It was a good story, plausible, vicious. It would have worked if I were the person they thought I was. At 10:15 a.m., the legal salvo landed, a formal threatening email from Hazewood's general counsel, a man I'd made small talk with at 3 Christmas parties. Ms. Reed, it began. This letter serves as formal notice that Hazewood Properties LLC is preparing to file an immediate injunction. Your actions constitute a clear and malicious breach of fiduciary duty, a transparent case of tortious interference, and the intentional infliction of financial damages. We are prepared to seek punitive damages to the full extent of the law. We strongly advise you to cease and desist and to contact our offices immediately to discuss the unwinding of this catastrophic bad faith action, a bluff a desperate, terrified, legal babble bluff. Breach of what fiduciary duty? I wasn't on his board. I was a lender. Tortious interference with my own contract? They were throwing legal spaghetti at the wall, hoping to God I was the provincial consultant who would be terrified by the big words. I forwarded the email to a single contact, Nadia Patel. I was at her downtown office by 11. Nadia did not look like the Hayes family's lawyers. She was black, sharp, and wore a bright red suit that screamed, "I eat men like you for breakfast." She specialized in high-net-worth, high-conflict disputes. I had hired her 2 years ago, on the day I realized my marriage was a cage. She had been on retainer quietly ever since. She had the email printed on her desk. "It's pathetic," she said, not even looking up as I sat down. "A scare tactic. Intentional infliction? Please, you're a lender. You exercised your rights under a contract they signed. They're legally naked, and they know it." She tapped her pen on the desk. "The PR, however, that's the real fight. Victor's narrative is strong. Black widow heiress destroys husband's family. It's catnip. We need to be ready for the media war because the legal one is already over. We didn't have to wait long. The Hayeses, in their arrogance, had made a critical mistake. They assumed every reporter was as lazy and gullible as the gossip columnist who was Mia's friend. They forgot about the real ones. At 3 p.m., a story dropped from a well-respected national financial news service. The reporter, a woman I'd never met, had apparently been sniffing around Hayeswood's miraculous growth for months. The sudden public implosion was the key she needed. Her headline was different. Hayeswood's 53 Nhuayro legacy was a 40 million house of cards. How one lender's quiet exit exposed years of hidden losses. I read the article, and it was a masterpiece of actual journalism. She had found the public filings. She had cross-referenced the property values. She had talked to subcontractors who hadn't been paid. While the Hayes family is painting lender Sophia Reed as a vindictive black widow, the article read, "An analysis of public filings shows Hayeswood Properties has been operating at a net loss for nearly 3 years, surviving solely on a massive low-interest line of credit from a single private trust, Northbridge. The $53 million legacy appears to be almost entirely leveraged against this one silent lender. The question isn't why Ms. Reed finally pulled the plug. It's why she didn't do it sooner." Nadia's office line chimed. It was the reporter. Nadia put her on speakerphone. "Ms. Patel," the reporter said, her voice fast and professional. "Your client is being painted as a villain. My analysis suggests she's just the auditor. I'm running a follow-up. Does Ms. Reed have a comment on why she pulled the funds?" Nadia looked at me. I nodded. We had one shot to redefine the narrative. "You can quote my client on this," Nadia said, and I spoke, my voice clear and calm. "I will not comment on private family matters. My decision was a financial one. Northbridge Capital Trust withdrew its funds from an investment that was no longer financially sound, run by a management team that I believed was taking on irresponsible, unsustainable levels of risk. If an entire $53 million enterprise collapses simply because one investor asks for their money back, then the problem is not with the investor. The problem is with the company's fundamental structure." We hung up. My quote was on the wire in 10 minutes. The effect was like dropping a match in a gas-filled room. The narrative didn't just shift, it shattered. Financial mismanagement, irresponsible risk, unsustainable structure. Those were words that other banks, The ones in the cross-default chain understood. My phone rang, a new number. I answered. Yes, Ms. Reed, Sophia. It's Tom, the CFO from Hazelwood. His voice was a high-pitched, terrified squeak. He sounded like he was hiding in a closet. The board is in an emergency session, he whispered, frantic. Victor is screaming. He's screaming about traitors and lawyers. The other banks, First Union, JPM, they're not even taking our calls. They're just sending notifications of default. Our lawyers are advising, they're advising a Chapter 11 filing by morning. We're done. He paused, took a ragged breath. Please, Ms. Reed, Sophia, just a 30-day extension, a week. Just give us a week to find new financing. Victor will step down. We'll do anything, please. I was silent. I thought of the employees, the secretaries, the janitors, the people from towns like Steelville. Tom, I said, send me the unredacted employee payroll and benefits ledgers for the last 5 years and the OSHA compliance reports. What? Why? That's highly confidential. If you want me to even think about pausing this execution, you'll send them, I said. You have 1 hour. I hung up. Meanwhile, Noah's purgatory was complete. The gossip blogs had found our wedding photos. The headlines were brutal. Blind, dumb, or both. Noah Hayes' small-town wife was richer than his daddy. The $53 million fumble, rich kid Mock's wife, she bankrupts his entire family. His texts had devolved into pure, incoherent misery. 2 p.m. My father is in his room. He won't come out. My mother says it's your fault. 4:15 p.m. What did I ever do to you, Sophia? What did I do that was so bad? He still didn't get it. He was still the main character. 45 minutes later, an encrypted file landed in my inbox from Tom. The ledgers. I sat in my small kitchen, the late afternoon sun streaming in. I opened the files and my plan changed. I was no longer just a lender collecting a debt. I was no longer a wife filing for divorce. I scrolled through the ledgers, and the cold, professional anger I'd felt was replaced by a hot, familiar Steelville-style rage. 3 years ago, cost-saving measure, 401k, matching for non-executive staff suspended. 2 years ago, healthcare realignment, moved all non-executive staff to high-deductible catastrophic plan. 18 months ago, efficiency optimization, paused quarterly on-site safety and training certifications for all construction crews. And right next to it, a week later, incident report, Carlos Ramirez fall from second-story scaffolding, minor injuries. He had cut their safety lines. He had stolen their retirement funds. He had gambled with their health insurance. He hadn't just been using my $40 million to cover his losses. He had been using his employees' lives, their futures, their safety. My original plan was simple. Cut the anchor, let the Hayes sink, walk away clean. But now I saw the truth. This wasn't just about an insult. This wasn't about my wounded pride. This was about what men like Victor Hayes do. They don't just build, they consume. They feed on people they consider small time. I opened a new file. I started a new spreadsheet. My revenge wasn't going to be just pulling the money. My revenge was going to be redefining who exactly was worthy of being saved. It was past 11 a.m. The day's digital war had quieted. The phone calls had slowed. The texts from the Hayes had devolved into exhausted silence. I was in my kitchen in my safe house apartment, reviewing the OSHA safety violations from Tom, the lines on the page blurring when a knock came. It wasn't a buzz from the intercom. Someone was at my actual apartment door. I froze. Nadia had advised me not to see any of them, to let the lawyers handle it. The knock came again, softer, almost hesitant, not the demanding pound of a Victor or a Brent. I looked through the peephole, my breath caught. It was Noah, but it was not the Noah I knew. Not the confident, smiling, handsome air in the tailored suit. This man was undone. His hair, always perfectly styled, was a mess, as if he'd been pulling his hands through it for hours. His expensive overcoat was unbuttoned, his tie was gone, the collar of his shirt was open. He was just standing in the hallway, under the flat, unforgiving fluorescent light, looking at my door as if it were the only solid thing in the world. He looked, for the first time in his life, exhausted and small. I opened the door. He just stood there for a long time, looking at me. His eyes were red-rimmed. He seemed shocked to see me, as if he hadn't believed I was really here. "Can I?" His voice was a dry rasp. He gestured vaguely inside. I stepped back. I did not invite him in. I simply made space. He walked past me into the living room he had always dismissed as my hobby. He looked around at my simple furniture, my old books, and the second-hand rug. He looked like a man who had landed on a foreign planet. "You were really living here," he whispered, mostly to himself. "All this time." "What do you want, Noah?" I asked. I did not sit. I stood in the entryway, my arms crossed. He turned to me, and the practiced, easy haze charisma was gone. He looked raw. "I didn't know," he said, his voice cracking on the last word. "You didn't know what?" "The finances, the risk." My God, Sophia, I thought he was a genius. I thought he was untouchable. I had no idea he'd leveraged everything. I just believed the stories. I believed it all. "You saw my analysis, Noah," I said, my voice as cold and flat as a steel blade. "You read my memo. You knew." "No," he said, and it was almost a sob. "I read it. I saw the words, critical vulnerability. But I didn't understand it, not really. It's just what I've done my whole life, Sophia. When something challenges the family, I just make it go away. I make it a joke. I thought I was just keeping the peace." He took a step toward me, his hands half raised in a plea. "I am sorry." It was the first time in our entire relationship I had ever heard him say those words without an excuse attached. "No, I'm sorry, but you're too sensitive." "No, I'm sorry, but that's just how they are." I'm sorry." He looked down at his shoes. I liked it. God, that's the awful part. "I liked that you were the girl from Steelville. I liked that you were my find, the brilliant, gritty, self-made woman who needed me, who needed my family." He finally looked up, and his eyes were full of a shame that was so profound, it was almost paralyzing. "It made me feel noble," he whispered. "It made me feel like a hero, saving you, giving you this life. And the truth is, the real you, the one who isn't grateful, the one who is smarter than all of us, the one who has this power, she terrifies me. You terrify me, Sophia." There it was, the entire ugly, pathetic truth. He didn't love me. He loved the story of me. He loved the version of me that made him feel great. And now he continued, seeming to shrink in on himself. "That's the only thing that can save us. Your power." "You didn't come here to apologize, Noah," I said. "You came here to negotiate." He flinched as if I'd slapped him. "Yes," he admitted, his voice hollow. "My father, he wants to meet. He has a proposal, a deal. I almost laughed. He's bankrupt. He has nothing to offer." "He's offering you the company," Noah said, the words tumbling out in a rush. "He's ready to step down. He'll give you the CEO chair, majority shares, anything. He just needs you to stop the bleeding. He needs you to inject enough capital to satisfy the other banks and pull Hayeswood out of the Chapter 11 filing. He took another desperate step. Don't you see, Sophia? This is your win. This is what you wanted. You'll have it all. You'll be in charge. We'll all have to bow to you. You'll be in the castle. You'll be the one running it all. I looked at this broken man offering me the keys to a kingdom that was already on fire. He still didn't get it. He was still, even in his ruin, speaking the Hayes language, the language of thrones and castles and power and bowing. He thought this was about being in charge. He thought this was about revenge. He thought I wanted to be them. They're not offering me a throne, Noah, I said, and my voice was so quiet, so tired. They're offering me their name. They're offering me a CEO title so that I will save the Hayeswood legacy. They don't respect me. They're just finally desperate enough to try and buy me. They're still using me, but this time they're just using my money instead of my silence. What? No, that's not, he stammered. But he knew it was true. I walked over to the door and opened it for him. The message was clear. It was over. He walked toward the door, a man in a daze. He paused, his hand on the frame, his back to me. Sophia, he said, his voice thick, was it ever real for you? I looked at the back of his head, the head of a stranger. I have one last question for you, Noah, I said, and I want you to be honest. It's the last honest thing that will ever pass between us. He turned, his eyes pleading. If you hadn't lost it all, if the company was fine, if you weren't standing to lose your inheritance, your name, your entire future, would you have ever come here tonight? Would you have ever, in a million years, stood in this room and told me you were sorry? He opened his mouth. A word tried to form, an excuse, a lie, a defense. But nothing came out. He just stared at me. And in his silence, I had my answer, the final, brutal, liberating truth. Goodbye, Noah, I said. He sagged as if I had physically struck him. He turned and walked out of my life. I agreed to the meeting. I met them the next afternoon, not at their home, not at their office, but on neutral ground, Nadia's sterile, glass-walled conference room. Victor looked like he had aged 20 years. The fury was gone, replaced by a gray, hollowed-out exhaustion. Victoria was not there. Mia and Brent were not there. It was just him, his lawyer, and me, with Nadia at my side, her laptop open. Victor did not make eye contact. He just spoke to the table. The offer is simple, he said, his voice a dry rasp. We, the board, will agree to a full transfer of controlling interest. 70%, the CEO chair. It's yours in exchange for, Nadia asked, her voice sharp. An immediate capital injection, Victor's lawyer said, taking over. $25 million enough to stabilize the holdings, satisfy the immediate demands of the secondary lenders, and halt the bankruptcy proceedings. So Sophia pays $25 million to be the CEO of your bankrupt company, Nadia said, her tone laced with ice. To save the company, Victor snapped, a flicker of the old rage. To save the legacy, to save the jobs. He finally looked at me. His eyes were bloodshot, but the old arrogance was still there, buried deep. You do this, he said, and you have it all. You win. But there is one condition, the name Hayeswood Properties. It stays, it all stays. You will not tarnish the legacy. You will not humiliate the family. You will save the name. There it was, the sale of his soul. He would give me his crown as long as I let him keep the title. He would rather be a puppet in a palace with Hayeswood on the door than a free man in a gutter. I looked at him. I looked at this man who had 48 hours ago laughed in my face. I felt nothing, just the cold, clear focus of a surgeon about to make an incision. I pretended to think. I tapped my pen on my legal pad. I looked at Nadia, then I turned back to Victor. "It's a significant offer," I said, my voice all business. "But I can't agree to invest $25 million into a company without full due diligence on its liabilities." "We're past due diligence," his lawyer sputtered. "We're in a crisis." "I know," I said. "And I've seen the financials, but I haven't seen the human liabilities. The payroll ledgers, the employee contracts, the full unredacted OSHA reports, and any pending labor claims. I won't inject $1 until I know the full extent of the rot you've hidden." Victor looked confused. "The employee contracts? What does that matter?" "It matters to me," I said, my voice hard. "I'm not buying a brand, Victor. I'm buying an asset, and a company that mistreats its workers is a bad asset." I had him. He was so desperate to save his legacy that he was blind. He thought I was negotiating on a technicality. He looked at his lawyer, who just shrugged. What did it matter? It was a token request. "Fine," Victor grumbled. "We'll get you the files. You can look at the damned HR reports." "Good," I said, standing up. "You have 24 hours to get me every file. My team and I will review them, and then, and only then, will I give you my final answer." Nadia and I walked out. We got into the elevator. The doors closed. "They're fools," Nadia said, smiling. "They just handed you the gun and the bullets." "They're not just fools," I said, clutching the printouts of the files Tom had already sent me. The ones that proved Victor had cut safety budgets. The ones that proved he'd stolen his employees' retirement. They're criminals. And they just invited me to the trial. The next morning, the bankruptcy court was not a grand wood-paneled hall of justice. It was a fluorescent-lit, beige-walled conference room in a federal building smelling of stale coffee and profound desperation. The room was packed. The secondary lenders, the men from J.P. Morgan and First Union, sat in a row, their faces grim. The court-appointed trustee sat at the head of the table, and at the center of it all sat Victor Hayes. He looked composed. He was gray and tired, but he had a faint, smug, martyred look. He had made his deal with the devil, or in this case, me, and he believed he was about to be saved. He thought I was here to accept his terms. "We are here to discuss the Chapter 11 reorganization. Filing of Hayeswood properties," the trustee began. Victor's lead lawyer, the same man who had threatened me, stood up. "Your Honor, and to the assembled creditors, we are pleased to announce we have a path forward. A strategic investor has agreed in principle to a significant capital injection." He smiled, a slick, reptilian smile toward me. "Ms. Sophia Reed, the primary lender, has agreed to assume the role of CEO, injecting $25 million to stabilize the company. The Hayeswood name and its legacy will be preserved. We are here to finalize that agreement." The room was silent. The trustee looked at the papers, then looked at me. "Ms. Reed, is this the agreement you are presenting to the court and the creditors?" This was the moment, the final move. Nadia Patel stood up, her red suit a slash of color in the beige room. "No, Your Honor, it is not." The air in the room evaporated. Victor's smug look vanished, replaced by a slack-jawed, white-faced confusion. What is she, my client, Ms. Reed, is not here as a strategic investor," Nadia said, her voice echoing with precise, cold power. "She is here as an acquirer, and she is not alone." I stood up, and on cue, a man who had been sitting quietly in the back stood with me. "Your Honor, I am here with my counsel and with Mr. Marcus Lowe." the managing director of a community enterprise fund I founded several years ago, the Steelville Community Trust. Marcus Lowe, a quiet, serious man in a simple suit, nodded to the court. Victor was sputtering. Steelville, what is this, Sophia? You agreed. I agreed to review the liabilities, Victor, I said, addressing him for the last time. And I did. I turned to the trustee and the bankers. Your Honor, gentlemen, we are not here to save Hazewood Properties. The Hazewood brand, in our estimation, is financially and morally bankrupt. Its name is worthless. Victor made a sound like he'd been choked. We are here, I continued, to present a competing offer, not to reorganize, but to acquire. The Steelville Community Trust, backed by capital from Northbridge, offers to purchase the company's core tangible assets, specifically the 4 completed commercial buildings and the 2 active construction sites, free and clear of the Hazewood name and its management. This theater, Victor's lawyer yelled. This is hostile. It's a personal vendetta. It's a sale, counselor, Nadia cut in. And it's a much better offer for your other clients. She nodded to the bankers. Our proposal will make the creditors here whole on an estimated 70 cents on the dollar. A significant improvement on the 30 cents Mr. Hayes's reorganization was offering. Furthermore, the new entity we are forming will offer new employment contracts to all current non-executive staff. We will be immediately restoring the 401k matching program and the healthcare benefits that Mr. Hayes cut 3 years ago. You could feel the shift. The bankers, who had been staring at a near-total loss, were suddenly sitting up, listening. They didn't care about Victor's legacy. They cared about 70 cents on the dollar. And what of the Hayes family? The trustee asked, his pen hovering. The Hayes family, I said, will receive no equity, no management positions, and no role whatsoever in the new entity. As the current shareholders of a bankrupt company, they will receive whatever, if anything, is left in the estate, after all creditors, all secured lenders, and all employee obligations have been paid in full, which, Nadia added, smiling, by our calculations will be absolutely nothing. You thief, Victor was on his feet, his face a purple mask of rage. He was pointing at me, his whole body shaking. You're looting. This is daylight robbery. She's tearing it apart for scrap, Your Honor. You can't let her do this. I built that company. This is destroying a $53 million legacy. The room was chaotic. His lawyer was trying to pull him down. Mr. Hayes, sit down, the trustee commanded. He looked at Victor with pure exhaustion. Sir, your company is bankrupt. Your legacy is a pile of debt. Ms. Reed's proposal is the only one on the table that preserves the jobs and pays the people you owe. But I am the only one who can run it, Victor wailed, a last pathetic plea. It's my name. Nadia looked at me. I nodded. It was time for the final cut. Your Honor, Nadia said, her voice slicing through the noise. The creditor's reluctance to leave Mr. Hayes in charge is well-founded. His leadership wasn't just aggressive, as he calls it was negligent. She slid a thin red binder to the trustee and copies to the lead counsel for the banks. My client, in the 24 hours of due diligence she was granted, was given access to all employee and safety files. Mr. Hayes wasn't just cutting 401ks, he was cutting safety. I spoke, my voice quiet, but it carried across the entire room. Victor, you cut the on-site safety and training budget by 60% 18 months ago to finance the interest payments on the Lakeside Gateway deal. Victor froze. He looked, for the first time, truly afraid. Nadia continued, reading from a page. We have the email chain, Your Honor, where Mr. Hayes was explicitly warned by his site manager that the scaffolding on the downtown project was not up to code. His written response was, "We don't have time for red tape. Make it work." 2 weeks later, a worker named Carlos Ramirez fell 2 stories from that exact scaffolding, suffering 2 broken legs and a fractured pelvis. The incident was buried. The worker was given a small private settlement and forced to sign an NDA. The legacy Mr. Hayes is fighting for is one of criminal negligence. The room was dead silent. This was no longer a financial discussion. This was a crime. The bankers looked at Victor with open disgust. He had not just lied to them. He had exposed them to massive liability. Victor Hayes collapsed into his chair. He was no longer a titan. He was just a small old criminal man in a suit that was suddenly too large for him. The trustee called for a 10-minute recess. It was a formality. It was over. When he returned, the verdict was swift. The creditors had voted unanimously to accept the acquisition proposal from the Steelville Community Trust. The motion to approve Victor's reorganization was denied. Hazewood Properties LLC was to be dissolved, its assets liquidated and sold. The name was dead. I walked out of the conference room with Nadia, my heels clicking. The hallway was a circus of cameras and microphones. The press, smelling the final kill, swarmed. A reporter, the same woman who had broken the House of Cards story, shoved a microphone in my face. Her voice was sharp. "Ms. Reed, Sophia, is it true you've taken everything? Do you have any comment on the fact that you have just personally and completely destroyed your ex-husband's $53 million family legacy?" I stopped. I turned. I looked directly into the camera lens, and I spoke to every woman who had ever been told she was small-time or provincial. "No," I said, my voice clear and steady. "I just stopped letting his legacy stand on my money. If something collapses when it can no longer rely on looking down on others, perhaps it deserves to collapse." Nadia guided me through the parting sea of reporters. 2 months later, I stood on the balcony of a half-finished building. It was the same building Carlos Ramirez had fallen from. My new entity, the one I'd formed with the Steelville Trust, was retrofitting it. We weren't building luxury condos. We were building a shared workspace, a community and business incubator for the exact kind of small-time companies I used to consult for. Down on the street, I watched a crew of workers leaving for the day. They were wearing new hard hats, all branded with the Steelville Trust logo. They were loud, laughing, grabbing coffee. I recognized a few of them from the old Hazewood payroll. A man near the front, walking without a limp, was pointing at some blueprints. It was Carlos Ramirez. He was the new site safety manager. I took a deep breath. The air smelled like sawdust and new paint. I didn't just tear down Victor's $53 million monument to his own ego. I had recycled the parts. I had taken the real value, the buildings, the jobs, the people, and transferred it into the hands of those who, like me, had been invisible for far too long. There was no happily ever after. There was just me, standing on my own foundation after the single highest value move of my life. Thank you so much for listening to this story. We would love to know where in the world you are listening from. So please drop a comment below and share your thoughts. Make sure to subscribe to Violet Revenge Stories. Like this video and hit that button to help us share this story with more listeners.